Hello and welcome to what I'm going to call Horror 101. I'm Paul,
And I'm Dave.
and this week we watched a little movie called A Nightmare on Elm Street. I love A Nightmare on Elm Street. Dave, you've never seen this movie before, have you?
No, but case of it being the horror franchise that it was, I always sort of saw the either jokes or references to its movie and or its franchise.
Okay, so we're doing this because Dave basically has seen no horror movies.
Well, there's some, but it's only been the couple that's like, oh, this is a thing I'm not used to if I want to keep a traditional mental scape.
So I know you've seen a couple of the Friday the 13th movies. You've seen Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
What else have you seen?
A particular one that's burned and seared into my mind for particular reasons is The Thing.
Oh, like the 80s one?
Yes,
Ah, that's a great movie.
it is. It scarred me.
Fair enough. Anyway, so we're gonna do a different horror movie every week in October because it's spoopy, and yeah. So up
Because,
this week,
it's the traditional time to do spoopy things. Like other particular people that decide to make summer the spoopy season for some reason. Not junking on them, but still, what are you doing?
so because Dave has never seen Nightmare on Elm Street, I decided this would be a good starting point. Um, what did you think of the movie, Dave?
Ironically enough, I was a little bit of two minds because, on the one hand, before watching it, it was the case of, okay, this is watching the very first movie of this super big horror icon that either has been traditionally spoofed or is essentially one of the big cornerstones of what horror is.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, it was the thought of, man, this is supposedly going to be amazing, or do I feel like I'm actually going to get some sleep this evening? But then there was the other hand of it, where it was, this was made around in the 80s, and not to knock them, but they had different thoughts and sensibilities of things, and more so, once you really get to the reality of things, you kind of have a moment of clarity of like, so this is the first movie. But on whole, it was interesting and left me with a whole lot of interesting questions of the essentially how the entire series kind of went on from this starting point to where it has sat to now.
Okay. So as you said, this is the first movie. I don't think it's the best one though.
On
I,
that case, I can definitely understand. Yeah.
in my opinion, three is the best.
Ooh.
Two is, I think, really underrated. And then after that, it's kind of hit or miss. I really like this film. I think it's like you said, it's definitely dated, but I love some of the stuff in it. I love the practical effects because I'm a sucker for that.
Mhm.
Like I love seeing like when she pulls off Freddy's face and like there's like the like it's all practical. There's no obviously there's no CGI because this is '84.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really love like the practical effects, and I think Freddy's like decently scary in this one. He's not the Freddy that is like super mainstream yet, like because most people they think of Freddy and he's like scary, but he also makes a lot of jokes, and in this movie he doesn't really do that much.
Okay. Because it was one of the things that I was definitely really concerned with coming into the film, that with how much he's been on the scene and especially the uh, reputation that he's kind of picked up, there's that little side of weird and goofiness to him that sort of makes you think, is this guy really scary? But another interesting thing while watching this film was there are one or two little scenes where he does do something really silly or ridiculous, but hidden under the guise of, oh God, that's horribly grotesque. A particular one that comes to mind is in his first appearance, uh, showing himself off, uh, taking his knife hand and chopping off a couple of his fingers, letting the blood splurt out.
Yes.
And seeing it just by itself was kind of like, that seems sort of a little silly, but within the whole balance of that entire scene, it adds to the, oh God, this is a dream, and oh God, this is spooky with all the particular stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I found in this, well, before getting to that thought, I think to stick with what you mentioned about the practical effects, the couple things that they did within this film within the 80s, I'm sure it was a typical sort of thing, but it never fails to impress. The For particular people listening, my apologies for spoiling the movie magic, but the rotating room idea with the first kill and the uh, one guy getting sunked into his bed with an explosion of blood.
Yes.
Both of those effects are jaw dropping and amazing for their time within the horror sort of genre.
Yeah, no, those are two really good kills. There's another effect that I feel like never gets talked about that I really love, and I love how simple it is. There's
Mm.
a scene where Nancy's asleep in bed, and we see Freddy kind of like push through the wall and kind of look around.
Oh, yes, especially with that one.
I love that effect. Do you know how that's done? It's the
I
simplest
can't
effect
remember
ever.
I can't remember the specific material, but it's essentially like a sheet or some particular sort of thing, and you just press into it enough that it shows the facial features, and you can push through it without really breaking through or being pushed back, and it has enough elasticity to sort of go back into its original position.
Yeah, it's just like a piece of rubber or something that he like leans into. And I'm like, that's such
Mhm.
a cool effect, and it's so simple, but it's so effective.
Yeah, so true. And it's kind of one of those particular things that you don't really know what's going on when you step into it, but it shows this sort of effect and then it comes back. And it's another particular thing about Freddy as the horror villain, especially within that being his realm of doing the deed is within dreams, and you can kind of go off the rails in those sort of cases. Like in the 80s, there's only so much you can do, but it can be interesting and intriguing with the ideas they come up with.
Yeah, no, I've always been kind of surprised that like Freddy hasn't had a resurgence like in modern terms because like realistically like CGI should be like the best thing that ever happened to the Nightmare franchise. Right?
I
Because you
suppose.
can literally do anything in a dream.
Yeah, that's definitely true, though. I think it's just a case of when the time it came out, how much of a smash it was, and then trying to get onto that supposed idea. It might be a case of burnout or such statuation of Freddy as a character that either trying to mess with it would give so much backlash to that sort of case, or trying something that's outside of the franchise or whatnot would either get uh, questioning or concern from supposed fans of the time. But you're definitely right. I think it just might be the case that someone with the particular idea just hasn't gotten the funds enough to actually make a movie or anything about it.
Apparently, so this is a little bit of a spoiler, but apparently um, there is traction on a new Nightmare on Elm Street because there had, like you said, there have been some like rights issue stuff with it and that.
Hmm.
But I really hope that there's a good one that comes out soon because I love Nightmare on Elm Street. It's one of the franchises that I really love.
Well, I definitely don't disagree. But again, just within that thought logic and whatnot, the one other thing that sort of came to mind after watching the film and having some time to sit on it was it reminded me of another particular series within different cadence of thing. of Bloodborne on the PlayStation system.
Okay. I don't know how, but I'm interested.
Okay, well, aside from the veneer that it shows off to people coming into this series of being a Victorian horror story facing off against werewolves and other monsters and creatures, playing through the game a bit more and diving into some more of the mechanics, it starts to head into a lot more dream logic and especially more eldritch abomination stuff.
Okay.
The author's name is escaping me, but going into those sort of horror stories and more so thought processes of what you think certain things are happening until you realize or come to the mindscape of, oh, this is how things are.
Okay. That's interesting, but I do want to know, what do you think of Freddy as a villain? Just from this movie, because obviously you haven't seen the others, but do you think he's effective, or is he kind of? I know some people. It's more in later films, but in later films especially, there's the accusation that he's too funny. I don't feel like that's
Well,
really a thing for the first movie. I think he's quite effective, but I was wondering.
well, I think just to completely answer your question, yes, Freddy is completely effective as a villain within this movie because despite the fact of them playing with a particular idea of how to supposedly defeat him, yeah, they don't even get anywhere close to. He is able to kill a villain at the start or his victims at the start, and he's able to continue his work when the film ends.
Well, so here's the thing. Um, the end of the film is the end of the film is kind of like a compromise, but I'm going to get a little behind the scenesy here, but
Alrighties.
the end of the film was a bit of a compromise between Wes Craven and the studio, because
Mm,
Wes Craven wanted this to be like a one and done. I'm going to make this movie and then move on to something else.
ah,
But the studio was like, no, no, we see franchise potential here, so we want some kind of ending that allows us to make a sequel. So that's kind of where
alright.
that ending came from, where we have like the top come down on the car and it's Freddy's colors, and then the mom gets pulled through the door window. That wasn't really intended to happen by Wes Craven. That was more of like, I'll do this because it'll make the studio happy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Uh,
it's also hard to tell if that's real or if it's in a dream.
yeah, that's definitely a trick. I suppose with how the film sort of faint or frames it and whatnot, that little bit of jarriness could be confused of, oh, it's a dream sort of sequence, so maybe that's how it was supposed to go. But also a case of, yeah, if they wanted to hide changes like that, that would be really simple if it's the case of it's messing with dream logic.
Well, and that's kind of like one of the things with this franchise. Like, in a way, it's the easiest franchise to write things, like to write around things, because you can just like, oh no, that was a dream. And like,
Uh,
you kind of can never get caught in continuity errors, because like, well no, that's not true, that was part of a dream or something.
oh, in those sort of cases, geez.
I will say that the second film doesn't really do a whole lot in terms of continuity, but 3 especially does.
Hmm.
But yeah, we're not going to get into the other films right now, because maybe another time. Maybe another time. 'Cause it
Possibly.
sounds like you
So,
enjoyed this film.
no, on whole, I definitely enjoyed it with the start of the spooky season and diving into another particular horror franchise that I'm not quite educated in yet.
Yes, well, maybe in the future we'll watch number 3, because we can skip 2.
Now, as it sits with this, I'm possibly going to look into exploring some of the other films and seeing how the franchise kind of goes along. Whether or not 2 will be a road bump or I'll manage to get to 3, we might have to see.
So 2 is difficult because it's not a bad movie. It just doesn't kind of fit with the rest of the Nightmare films.
It's kind of the case of, oh, hey, we have a franchise on our hand, but then the guy in the corner is like, yeah, but how do we do it? Like,
Pretty much.
oh.
Yeah, they kind of didn't know how to bring Freddy back, and it's like it's not a bad movie, and I feel like it's got reassessed recently because it's like there's a lot of like gay undertones to the film. Like there's a lot of it where you can be like, oh, this is clearly talking about like the fear of coming out and stuff like that, and it's like okay, that's kind of interesting, but it kind of doesn't fit with the rest of the franchise super well. I feel like it's a movie that would have been like much better received if it wasn't called A Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
Interesting. Always intriguing.
How,
Again, I'll look into it myself and see how it goes.
yes. However, we will not be going to A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 next week. We will be going to a different film.
Ooh, what series are we going to be diving into this time?
So, I guess, yeah, technically there is a sequel to this movie. So the next movie we will be watching is Happy Death Day.
I think I somewhat recall it from trailers about it, though I think it might have been a couple years ago that this was originally released.
It's a 2017 horror comedy.
Okay.
You've seen Groundhog Day, right?
Yes, with Groundhog Day, I've seen it and know the premise.
Okay, I'm going to pitch this movie to you very simply. Groundhog Day meets Scream.
I'm not sure whether or not that would be categorized as two exactly different flavors in those sort of cases. Like, on the one hand, my brain's sort of saying, supposedly that would work, but also the case of, what?
Yeah, it's a slasher horror comedy about somebody who keeps repeating the same day.
Intriguing.
It's
Though, it's also a case of, I've been working through a couple particular game series. The most recent one now is Liza P, and it's kind of the case of, let's play through a game. Oh, I'm stabbed with a sword, died. And come back to where I originally started from. It's like, okay, let's go again.
Yes, I think you're going to really enjoy this because it does have a comedic bend to it, but it still does have some like good, scarier stuff in it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. So that will be next time. Until then, I'm Paul.
And I'm Dave.